Thank you.
Thank you. And joining me now is J.M. Berger, a fellow at the International Center for Counterterrorism at The Hague. Steve Clemens, Washington editor-at-large for The Atlantic and an MSNBC contributor, and former intelligence officer Malcolm Nance, who's now an MSNBC terrorism analyst. I'm going to just go across with you, gentlemen, and I'll start with you, J.M. Berger. I mean, the administration's argument is that they chose these countries and issued this travel ban in order to further national security. What do you make of that argument, and what do you make of this judge's decision to now at least temporarily halt this travel ban?
Well, I'm not an immigration law expert, so I won't comment on the judge's decision. I do think that the ban is more symbolic of the groups that the Trump administration wants to exclude from the United States than from any kind of national security imperative. You know, I don't think it makes us safer.
And why not? I mean, their argument is, well, if these are countries that are unstable and that internally are having issues with jihadism that are facing those countries, that why bring somebody who's exposed to that here? Why does it not make us safer, if you could explain?
Well, it exacerbates the perception that the United States is at war with Islam, that there's a clash between the United States and the Muslim world. But, you know, even on a pragmatic basis, it basically fails. We're talking about really such tiny fractions. You know, when we look at this kind of thing, as other people have pointed out, these countries have not been the source of terrorist attacks on U.S. soil over the last 10 years. But more to the point is we're really taking actions that impact hundreds of thousands or millions of people to deal with a problem that can be counted in handfuls. And
meanwhile, just stay with you just for a moment, J.M. Berger, the White House in this CVE, what they call this sort of counterterrorism document that's produced, are excluding American terrorists, white nationalist groups, etc., from their designation of terrorism in terms of trying to counter violent extremism. What do you make of that? You wrote about that today. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, really, we only ever had a token presence of white nationalists in our countering violent extremism programs. So these programs are meant to counter terrorism by doing community building and doing different kinds of non-kinetic things where you don't arrest somebody or kill somebody. And they were theoretically colorblind. They were theoretically could apply to any ideology, but in practice, they were mostly targeting Muslims. The decision, which has been reported but not announced, you know, so we're still hearing this from sources, is that, you know, they're going to remove white nationalism and domestic extremism from that mix and make this solely focused on Islamic extremism. And similar to the travel ban, you know, this is really about the optics of who this administration wants to exclude. You know, throughout the campaign, we saw that white nationalists in this country were ecstatic about the things that the Trump campaign was saying, and they are ecstatic about his first 2 weeks in office. All of this is designed to polarize people and to start moving us toward a definition of an American identity that is white and Christian.
Yeah, and Malcolm Nance, we know that there are at least two or three people inside of the administration that have this ideology that is this sort of the real fight is between the Christian West, essentially white Christians, and Islam. So talk a little bit about this influence that Steve Bannon and General Michael Flynn are having on this administration, and are they making matters worse when it comes to counterterrorism?
Well, they're absolutely making matters worse. That's just patently obvious by this blanket travel ban that they had on these 7 countries, which obviously were low-hanging fruit. And I think they were actually test beds to see how in the future they can just move forward and start excluding people from other Muslim countries. But like JM said a little earlier, there is an ideology, there is a movement within the White House that I think that they're pushing as well, which is this nationalist Christian identity of the United States. And it's interesting because I didn't accidentally use that word, Christian identity. There have been right-wing extremist movements in this nation, dominionist in nature, which is theologically Christian, who believe the United States should be a Christian-only nation, and who have actually carried out acts of terrorism in the Christian identity movement itself. But, you know, Steve Bannon himself believes in, you know, a form of political anarchy against liberal democracy and people who are liberals themselves, based on the writings of Alexander Dugin of Russia, who is a The best way to put it is he's the Rasputin of the Eastern European nationalist movement, and he aligns very closely with him, as well as General Flynn, who has some very interesting, and I'm being polite, words, beliefs about what he thinks this alliance against ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Iran, and North Korea should be, and that he should align now the United States and Russia together as this Christian bulwark to stand against Islam itself. All of this is a validation of Osama bin Laden's ideology, where he believed that there was going to be a clash of civilizations between Christian West and Islam. And so it's very fascinating to see these top-tier ideologues in the White House fulfilling bin Laden's wish, so to speak.
Yeah, and just to reset for those just tuning in, a federal judge in Washington State has issued a temporary restraining order. It is a nationwide temporary restraining order that immediately halts enforcement of Donald Trump's executive order, the travel ban that he issued to those traveling to the United States from 7 targeted countries. And then this is in response to a lawsuit that was filed jointly by Washington State and a second state. And so this, for now, is a halt to the travel ban. I want to go to Steve Clemens for just a moment, Steve, because this ideology that we're seeing in the White House, it does want this sort of clash of civilizations between the Christian West, including Russia, and Islam, is actually also being played out in Europe, where these Alexander Duganites are also operating in places like Germany and France, in England. So this is not just confined to the United States, right?
No, we have a set of elections coming up in France. We're all very interested in what begins to evolve in France with the rise of Marie Le Pen and a kind of breakdown of one of the leading conservative candidates who was looking like he might win there and block her ascension to some degree. So these populist movements that have reacted both to economic troubles, to terrorism inside their countries from foreign trained fighters that had gone into Syria, come in and wreaked havoc in their countries, in addition to the refugee crisis, has created a politics of pugnacious nationalism in those countries just like our own. And so that's why you see Donald Trump hanging out with Nigel Farage, making common cause with Marie Le Pen, folks in the Dutch political system that are on the kind of far pugnacious right as well. But these are not classic traditional conservatives. These are movement, revolutionary conservatives really trying to turn the structures of their governments upside down, much like I think Donald Trump is doing now in the United States.
And Steve Clemens, you've even seen Donald Trump criticize the German Chancellor Angela Merkel for being too permissive in terms of allowing refugees in. You saw this very weird sort of phone spat with the Australian Prime Minister over the admission of maybe 1,200 refugees that the Obama administration had agreed to take in, who are currently in Australia. So we're seeing this being pushed now from the United States to Europe. That is unusual, right? I mean, we haven't had
no, it's
really
totally unusual.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, I just got off the plane from Japan. I just arrived 2 hours ago, and Japan, we've got Prime Minister Abe coming to town in a few days to meet Donald Trump. They're really in shock at the way that Donald Trump treated Malcolm Turnbull, the Prime Minister of Australia. It's such a stalwart ally of the United States at the time that things are getting tense with China on a bunch of fronts. We talk a lot about Europe, but there's also a kind of brewing set of equities and problems in Asia that Malcolm Turnbull encounter has, I think, created some real shock throughout the world, not just in Japan, but also in Europe. The Angela Merkel kind of slap around was extraordinary for such a fundamentally important partner of the United States in Europe, and even, the various questions of NATO. And I find it a really interesting gap between the national security team, like General Mattis, General Kelly, and others that are trying to calm the waters, and the White House itself, which seems to be riling up those waters simultaneously.
Yeah, and J.M. Berger, I mean, Australia is not just a close ally that fought with us in war after war, but also is a close intelligence sharing ally. How much of a risk do we have now of alienating the people not only with whom we fight, but with whom we share intelligence?
Well, there's going to be a lot of questions about what intelligence we share with whom. If you're in another country, particularly intelligence regarding Russia, I think that you have to imagine that our allies are going to think that this is very sensitive material that maybe they don't want to share with the United States at this point, that they don't know it can be secure. That particularly affects Syria. I mean, in Syria, we're really probably headed into uncharted waters here. We don't really know what the administration's intentions are, but they've made very friendly sounds toward the Assad regime and toward the Russian effort there. And as an intelligence matter, there's a potential disaster lurking there because, you know, there's a vetted opposition of moderate rebels in Syria who we have a great deal of intelligence on. We collected that intelligence on the basis of being a good faith partner. And, you know, that intelligence is now in the hands of the Trump administration, which may choose to share it with Assad or Russia or somebody else.
Well, that is not comforting. All right, J.M. Berger, Steve Clemens, and Malcolm